to be distracted from or forget the simplicity of the gospel and of Christ and Christ crucified and that amazing grace that we just sang about. Through many dangers, toils, and fears, we have already come. And grace always leads us through. It's always with us. You know, I've been thinking lately on how uncertain everything can feel and different everything can feel, and how the longer I go on in the faith, the more you realize that even your very thoughts and your emotions and even the intentions of your heart, none of it can be trusted. None of it is reliable. The only thing that is reliable is the rock on which we stand. He's the only thing that we can count on 100% of the time forever. And I found that to be a great comfort when all seems impossible, all seems shifting and confusing. And, you know, there are times in your life where absolutely nothing makes sense, or where you're facing obstacles that you know there's no way over or through them in any way but with the Lord. Whether it's the greatest financial strain we've ever faced and you don't know where the next dollar is going to come from, or it's the worst sickness you've ever seen, or the most tried relationship from someone close, all the way down to even spiritually where all just it seems so difficult that I think sometimes that's the devil's main objective with me, is to make everything seem too great to overcome, and it makes it seem impossible enough to where paralysis is kind of the default position. That's what the flesh wants to do. And it's in those moments that we have to turn back to the roots and the foundation, which is it's just always Jesus. The scripture says over and over that he is the cornerstone on which we are built, that we as living stones are being fitted together to create a temple that he's pleased to dwell in. Go ahead and turn to Psalm chapter 62. You know, it's true that many would look down on the life of a Christian, a true Christian, and think, why would you want to do that? It seems as if everything is terrible lots of the time, that the Lord leads us through trials and storms and fires that he uses to forge purity in us that is necessary. But if you think about the most successful people in the world that have everything that you would want in the world, the power and the money and health and whatever, but they don't know the Lord, they think they can count on everything that they have. Like, it all seems good to them, but really, you could trip and fall and be dead in a blink of an eye. You can lose your fortune with one turn of the stock market. Your health could disappear with one microscopic parasite or virus. And then at the end of it all, even if everything is perfect in this life and you get to the end, they'll miserably find out with great woe that none of it meant anything. None of it was really reliable, because in the end comes destruction without the Lord. Psalm chapter 62, verse 1, my soul waits in silence for God only. From him is my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold, and I shall not be greatly shaken. You know, the word says that everything that can be shaken will be. And anything that we put confidence in or feel stability in our surroundings, all of it can be completely shaken and removed. The only thing that is sure is the rock. Verse 5, my soul wait in silence for God only, for my hope is from him, and he only is my rock and my salvation. My stronghold, I shall not be shaken. On God, my salvation and my glory rest. The rock of my strength My refuge is in God. Trust in him at all times, O people, and pour out your hearts before him. And God is a refuge for us. I like that no matter the circumstance, the Lord is always a refuge. He is the strong tower that nothing can assail. It's like it says in Romans 8, where nothing could separate us from his love, like nothing can touch us there. And I like that we can pour out our hearts before him. He's a refuge for us, even in the turmoil of our own heart, which sometimes I think is more difficult than anything that we face externally or physically, is the turmoil within. Just name your situation. It varies, but even in that, he's a refuge from us. We can pour out our heart to him and then count on him that he changes our heart, that he's the only one that can give us a new heart, that he can give us the purity that we long for. He can rescue us from our conflicting and confusing feelings. Matthew chapter 14. In verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side. And while he sent the crowds away, after he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." And I read that this week. Immediately what occurred to me was the Lord saying, "I am that I am," where Jesus says, "It is I," when his disciples are terrified in the midst of a storm and they see, maybe a spirit coming to destroy them or something. They're afraid. And we all find ourselves in this storm over and over, where the waves are battering the ship, and it's those moments that are most precious when it's only Jesus that we find the comfort that we need. It's him that shows up, and when he says that he's there, and that's made manifest to us, it's always true. But when we realize it in the darkest moments, that we can cling to him, and then everything seems fine. It doesn't matter what's happening. It doesn't matter what storm rages. And Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" I think this image portrays itself when we face an obstacle and it seems as if, it's just so terrifying that we just have to have the Lord's help, and then he shows up and we're relieved in his presence. And then I think things can get a little worse sometimes. We're walking with him on the water, like the circumstances are still impossible, and then your focus could shift, as Peter's did, to the wind and the waves, which looks scary because, I'm walking on water. Okay, that's great, but calm water would be safe. Like, anybody can walk on calm water, except you can't walk on water. It's like you forget that. It's like, what difference does the waves make? You're already defying the impossible with the Lord. And so, he's walking on the water. It was never calm, but he got out and he's following the Lord. He's looking at him, and then the devil makes the trial worse. He makes the battle harder, or the Lord does, and maybe the waves get higher, and then you hear them crash, and your focus shifts off of the Lord, and it's back on whatever it is that's difficult, whatever it is that is impossible. And then he's worried about that, and he begins to sink. And again, you're in your own power and not relying on the Lord, and it's overwhelming you, and you'll drown in it, and it's impossible again. But then he turns his attention back to Jesus, and he cries out for him to save him. And I just love that picture of seeing Jesus reach his hand out to grab him as he's sinking, and then Peter's clinging. You can imagine if you were terrified in a violent storm in the water that you're clinging to Jesus, who you know that can save you, and then that's all that there is. That's all that matters, is that he is the rock. And then you look at the physical circumstances and it's still impossible. You're standing on water, but in the spirit, like you are standing on a rock right there with Jesus, and he is what grounds you and what you can always cling to. And if we see things rightly, I think it's just one of our main missions in the flesh is to constantly put aside what we see with our eyes and to try to turn our spiritual eyes to what the Lord sees and what is more real than what we see. It doesn't seem that way because it's invisible, and everything we see we can touch and it feels real, but all of this is less trustworthy than whatever is supernatural in the spirit, whatever he is saying. And he is with the one now that created the storm. He created the water and the waves. I want to look at Psalm 102. It's the Lord that is, he's the Alpha and the origin and the beginning of all things, and he's the end. He's far beyond everything. He's the one that holds the power, that holds it all together. There's no circumstance. There's nothing that escapes his notice, nothing that concerns his ability. Verse 25 in Psalm 102. Of old you founded the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Even they will perish, but you endure. And all of them will wear out like a garment, like clothing. You will change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end. The children of your servants will continue, and their descendants will be established before you. Everything will pass away. The earth will roll up like a scroll, and the heavens will melt with intense heat. But, it's the Lord that we look to. He is the anchor of our soul, the hope that we have in him. And every promise that he makes, like it says in, I believe it's Hebrews chapter 6, that, the Lord made sure his promise by swearing an oath, upon himself. And it's impossible for him to lie. It's literally not a possibility. It's contrary to who he is at his core. He is the truth. He is the power that holds all things together. Like everything that is good is in him. Everything that is true comes from him. So he can't speak something contrary to himself. Turn to Isaiah chapter 40. So when he says that his calling and his promises and his gifts are irrevocable, and that he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and that he's always with us, those things are always true. Chapter 40 and verse 12, and we'll close with this. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens by the span, and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighted the mountains in a balance, and the hills in a pair of scales? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, he lifts up the islands like fine dust, and even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. And all the nations are as nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless. Verse 25. To whom then will you liken me that I would be his equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars. The one who leads forth their host by number, he calls them all by name. because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power. Not one of them is missing. And why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? Do you not know, and have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable, and he gives strength to the weary. And to him who lacks might, he increases power. Though the youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength, and they will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired, and they will walk and not become weary. Hallelujah.